Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Anna and here on this channel we like to talk about all things video games. So like many people this past month, I have been really addicted to playing Silksong. This is like the only game that I've like really invested my time into lately. I literally tell myself to stop playing at certain hours because it feels like every time I pick up this game I sink like 3-4 hours in, and I remember one night I literally played until like almost like 6 a.m. and I was like, okay, I need to have some discipline with putting down this game, otherwise I just get sucked into it so easily. Actually, as of last night, I just got the very first ending of the game and I clocked about like a little over 45 hours and I still have so much to explore, so much to do, and yeah, I know I'm not nearly towards the true end of the game, so I plan to get back into it pretty much immediately. And just to talk about my personal thoughts on the game so far, without spoilers of course, I think that this is easily one of the best games of 2025, which isn't very surprising, right? We expected this game to be pretty damn good. It's interesting because I went into Silksong with a completely different mindset than when I first played Hollow Knight. So when I played Hollow Knight, I think it was like around the time that it released and I really wasn't into it. I think I just wasn't really aware of what type of game Hollow Knight would be, and I just wasn't looking for that experience at the time that I was recommended this game. My friend basically just said, it's a fun game, you should try it out. And when I tried it out, I was like, I don't know, this game doesn't really seem to be for me. I'm not really vibing with it. There's not really a strong narrative component and there's just so much exploring and I just feel like my heart's not in it at the moment. I think that was when I was a lot different of a gamer back then. Like the type of games that I played and the way I played them was completely different than how I play games now. Back then and even now, I was never super into Metroidvania, so that was also part of it. But with Silksong finally announcing that they were releasing this year, I knew it was going to be a huge moment that I didn't want to miss out on, and I really wanted to experience it with the rest of the world. So I was like, okay, I'm going to give this game an earnest shot compared to Hollow Knight. So I tried the demo when I was at PAX West and I loved it. I thought with the new mindset that I had now, I just like really enjoyed exploring and getting used to the combat and just like preparing myself for the type of game it was. So I really thought that was one of the best demos that I played this year, and I play a lot of demos, so I was like really impressed with how much fun I had with that demo. So with this much more open mindset going into Silksong compared to Hollow Knight, I think I was set up for success in terms of like experiencing this game. I love this game so much. I had so much fun. The highlight for me is definitely the exploration. I just love exploring every nook and cranny of this game and completing the map. I think it's extremely rewarding and satisfying. I love seeing how all the different areas are unique to each other and the different kind of environments they have. And me being like a relatively beginner at this kind of game, I think that in the beginning, combat was really tough for me. I think I had a really hard time getting used to just getting better at fighting a lot of these arenas and bosses. But for the most part, even though I'm a beginner at this type of game, I felt like the bosses and the arenas had just the right amount of difficulty where it was definitely difficult, but it didn't feel like unsurmountable. And it felt like every iteration I was fighting like a boss, I would learn something and just get better at it slowly and slowly, and it felt like very possible with the amount of work I put in. Not saying there weren't a few rooms where I was like, why did they make this room so difficult? Like there's no reason to make it this hard and make the run back to this room so lengthy. Those kind of rooms I definitely felt pretty frustrated in, but again, for the majority of the game, I felt like a lot of the difficulty was, you know, not unsurmountable. It was very doable with enough skill and practice, and that's what I felt was really satisfying about the game, how it felt really rewarding to be able to finally beat these bosses and the difficulty curve. And this part is obvious, but the game is so beautiful. I love the art. I love the variety in the creatures and the biomes. In terms of the music, I thought it would be a little bit more engaging. I felt like it was mostly just like background music, and I felt like there were only a few sections where I felt really into the music. Like I remember at the beginning of Act 2 where you reach that area, I felt like the music there was really, really good. And then there were parts like Greymore where I really hated the music because it was so depressing. And I get that the environment is supposed to be dreary and depressing and gray, but yeah, I just like found myself wanting to get out of those areas really quick. But yeah, this game overall, one of the best games of this year for sure. I feel like it's definitely going to be nominated for Game of the Year. And I feel like there's still so much for me to get value out of this game, even though I got the first ending already. So with that being said about the game itself, I want to rewind a bit to talk about Silksong and its release. Well, talking about the timeline of when Silksong was initially announced to finally being released this year, because I think it's quite a remarkable industry moment that we got to witness in real time happen just recently. So if we're talking about the announcement for Silksong, it was announced over 6 years ago, and that trailer where they announced it has about 8.5 million views currently. And Silksong went on to have about a 7-year dev cycle. There's this article in Bloomberg that made its rounds when Silksong was released, and it was titled "Why Silksong Took 7 Years to Make." And it was an article where Team Cherry was interviewed, and they kind of go into why the dev cycles ended up taking much longer than they thought initially. And TLDR, there was no like big controversy or anything like that when it came to why this dev cycle got so stretched out a lot more than initially planned. It was mostly just attributed to this started out as planned for a DLC, but then it kept growing and growing as ideas grew and grew, and they just kept working on it to make it bigger and better, and they just really took their time to make it a great game. They say there were no snags or big challenges they ran into. They just wanted to create the best game that they could. And Team Cherry being quite a small team, this would take a much longer than if, a bigger company ended up taking the project. Then just a couple months ago, Silksong was announced to be releasing this year in 2025 through the April Nintendo Direct, where they showed up for literally like 5 seconds. I remember watching and reacting to that April Direct, and I was like, they just announced that Silksong is coming out this year, and that's it. Like, they don't even have like a proper trailer. Like, this game is going to be huge, but they just decided to just slot into one of those like montage reels of games releasing, and I just couldn't believe that. I'm not even like a huge Hollow Knight or Silksong fan as I'm watching this, but I'm like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem like it matches the hype for this game. Then in August, Team Cherry hosts a live stream where they debut a trailer that finally gives the release date for Silksong, and that being in September. Then in response to Silksong releasing their release date, other games actually end up moving the release date for their games because they just know that Silksong is going to be this behemoth of a release and they're going to completely dwarf other games. In response, I remember seeing on my timeline other dev teams and indie games say, hey, sorry about this, but we're gonna change our release date and delay a bit because of Silksong. Like, that's straight up not going to be good business for us, so we're moving our date. Some games went viral making this decision, and these posts actually got more attention than the posts surrounding what their actual game was about. So with Silksong's release date nearing, Hollow Knight hits a new peak of over 70,000 concurrent Steam players right before the release. And then Silksong, being the #1 most wishlisted Steam game, hits almost 5 million wishlists shortly before release. So now talking about post-release, the game comes out on September 4th with a price tag of $20 USD with regional pricing. So many people wanted to buy the game that Steam actually crashed and people couldn't actually check out their cart. Regardless, on launch day, Silksong ends up hitting over 500,000 Steam concurrent players within 4 hours of release. Silksong ends up getting a Metacritic score of 91, and within 2 weeks, they are estimated to have sold over 4 million copies across all platforms. I mean, I don't need to be the one to tell you that this is insane. Like, this is a level of success that indie games and even AAA companies can only dream of. And speaking of indie games, I think it's really interesting that Team Cherry went completely against the indie gaming marketing playbook. They gave out 0 review copies, which is why it took so long for the Metacritic score to go up compared to other big releases, because they didn't give out any copies to the usual press sites. Personally, I didn't see any creators or influencers do any kind of sponsored or paid content for this game. I don't think that anybody was paid to endorse this game or anything like that. I don't even think that Team Cherry themselves gave out free copies. I think if people received free copies, it was most likely done through like third-party platforms. So for example, like if Xbox gave their influencers free copies to silksong. I saw 0 ads for this game, besides being, 5 seconds in the Nintendo Direct, if you really count that. And then practically 0 content on Team Cherry's social media and sparse community updates leading up to release. And it's funny because they can definitely afford to do these things, and they just chose not to do any of these. Again, simply because they can, and the success of the game, the sequel to their game, doesn't really depend on it. But I think anybody working in marketing like me would tell you that you are setting yourself up for failure if you don't do any of these things. You usually need some sort of community management, especially for a game that has such a passionate fan base. It's crazy to me that they have these like super fans and pretty much didn't give them any community support throughout these years. You gotta make social media content and just like post on social media so people know about your game. Most games need to get their keys in the hands of influencers and creators, so they stream your game or talk about it to their audience. You want to be participating in Steam festivals and events, something like one of the many events that happen during Summer Games Fest. You want to send out keys to PR so they actually write articles about your game and review it. And a lot of the times you can get direct conversions for people to purchase your games if you pay for ads and just paid promotion. And I'm sure Team Cherry had the resources to do these things, but they just didn't. Regardless, I think Team Cherry and silksong has become quite the aspirational figure in the indie gaming space. It's quite some aura to be able to not do any of like the traditional marketing and still be so successful. It's kind of like, it kind of has the vibe of like, make way for the king, because here comes this game with like infinite aura, and whatever they did, all the other games in the space were looking at them to see what kind of success they garnered, and obviously their players and audience were also interested to see what they would do with this game. And again, I think it's really cool that this company was able to rely on the success from the first game to be able to do things the way they wanted to, or not do, both creatively and monetarily. I feel like there's only a few devs that come to mind for me that kind of can flex this creative freedom because they made such an amazing game before. People like Concerned Ape with Stardew Valley, Toby Fox with Undertale. And while at the same time, silksong can be seen as like an aspirational figure in the space, in the indie game space, I think it could be seen as kind of like a fuck you to the AAA games and big publishers out there. At least I think that's how people talk about silksong sometimes. They look at this game, they use this game as ammo to say to these big corporations like, hey, look at one of the most successful games this year and look at what they're doing and you're not. First of all, the game is so cheap for what it is. $20? Okay, in my opinion, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think this game is a little too cheap. I think it could have at least been $30, and I personally would have been okay paying a little bit more than that, but I understand I'm not like the most average consumer, but I still think they could have at least sold for $30. I think that selling at 20 actually made other games, other indie games in the space look kind of bad at how they price their games. For example, I just played a game called Sword of the Sea and I clocked like a little over 2 hours, and this game cost $30, and I bet that there were plenty of games in the indie game space that felt kind of self-conscious about pricing their game more expensive than silksong when you compare like the hours you can get in that game versus their game. And silksong obviously isn't expected to partake in any like scummy monetization practices, even though they certainly can take advantage of the fact that they're the #1 most wishlisted Steam game. And it's just the fact that you can get so many hours of content out of silksong, easily 100 hours, and you have the same AAA companies and big publishers releasing games for 4 times the price with similar game time. But these things aren't unique to silksong, right? Hades 2 just released with a Metacritic score of 94, priced at $30. Blueprints is one of the highest rated games that released this year with a Metacritic score of 92, priced at $30 as well. Okay, as a side note though, I was miserable playing this game, and I think that I'm not saying it's a bad game or anything, it just wasn't for me, but I have a whole video on why this game didn't exactly vibe with me, and I get why people like it, but I will say that that game was not for me. And then of course we have Expedition 33, which could be considered indie or AA, I guess, but this game looks just as good, if not better, than some AAA games. priced at $50, and it's widely expected to win Game of the Year this year. These games were all released in 2025, and I think there's multiple reasons for this culmination of indie games being able to stand their ground against these huge AAA games, and we're seeing this in full force in 2025. First, I think it has to do with the democratization of game dev. I think back then, big publishers and companies were expected to rule the industry. For me, as a 90s kid who grew up playing video games, I always felt like game dev was a pretty inaccessible thing. I don't think as a kid I would have known where to start learning about game dev and the tools and resources required for it. And I always thought it was like so expensive and difficult to create games, and you always had to be part of a big company to be able to do something like that. And I'm not saying that these aren't true today. I think even at the indie level or any level, it's still expensive to make a game, and it's extremely difficult to make a good game. I work at a game studio, so I see it firsthand just how hard it is to make a game. I'm not trying to downplay any of that, but I think it is a fact that game dev is more accessible now than it has been in any other point in history, and that just means more tools in the hands of more people with great ideas to realize those ideas into games without always relying on these big companies. I think the concept of like hashtag solo dev and being a solo dev is proof of this democratization of game development. Secondly, I think culturally, and this is more of a personal observation, but I think people are more willing to play indie games now than they were back then. I think people now are definitely more willing to try out a game if it has like an intriguing concept. That is definitely the case for me compared to back then when we would just buy from like the big publishers like Nintendo, Sony, Xbox. If I think of some personal examples from this year, one of my most viral clips this year was me playing a game where you just flip eggs. I just played a game called The Trolley Solution, which is a game based off the ethical dilemma, the trolley problem, because it sounded funny to me. There was also a game that I picked up for dirt cheap called Chairbound, which is a game about how you have 10 minutes to escape from being tied down in a chair. And then Blueprints is also one of those games where I don't think I would have ever really tried this game before. I did get caught up kind of a little bit in the review hype, but I think back then I definitely wouldn't have been open-minded to try out a game like this, and now I'm just much more willing to give it a shot because people were just talking so highly of it. I think the line between indie, AA, and AAA in terms of like production quality and how good a game is or looks is becoming a little bit more blurred. And the only thing really separating AAA from the rest is perhaps the monetization practices. And players have most definitely have become more increasingly conscious of this. So back then we had the options of buying mostly our games from Nintendo, Sony, Xbox. Today we got the same Nintendo announcing the Donkey Kong Bonanza DLC for the price of Silksong and the Pokemon Legends Z8 DLC before it even comes out for the price of Hades 2. Now everyone understands the breadth of options you have when it comes to getting your money's worth in the games you buy. There's plenty of cheap games that you can get many hours out of, and it's made it harder to justify spending $70, $80 for a game these days. The latest example of this that I saw was for Silent Hill F. I saw some debate over paying that much for this game. On one hand, I saw like people saying like, yeah, why would I spend $70, $80 on this game? This game is like, I don't know, like 10 hours long. And just playing the numbers game, why would I pay that much for Silent Hill F when I can get Silksong for $20 and get 10 times more hours out of it? And then I saw the other side of the debate of it where people were saying, you can't really just like compare just purely how much hours you can get out of the game, especially for horror games where it's not the greatest experience if you stretch it out and have hundreds of hours in it. It's supposed to be like a short experience. It's supposed to pack a punch, and you can get replayability in other ways, such as replaying the game again to get the different endings and speed runs possibly. I agree that it's a little bit more subjective than just looking at how many hours you can milk out of the game, but the best analogy I have for this is actually when I think about it in terms of like paying for like a designer bag or a designer item. So I think that like when you pay for something like Silent Hill F, you're not really just paying for the game, you're kind of paying for the IP, the universe that you can play this game in, that you are playing a game within this franchise. Because when you pay for like a designer bag, you can buy a Chanel bag for, I don't know, like $1,000, right? But it costs like $20 to actually make the bag, you are not paying really for the bag. You are paying for the fact that you are getting a Chanel bag, that it's labeled Chanel, and that it's a luxury item that you can show off that it is from Chanel. I think it's kind of the same way when you think about it in these like premium games where it's definitely expensive, but you are paying more for the brand and the fact that you get to experience a game within this world. It's like a popularized IP that only belongs to them. And to be completely honest, I expected the inflation of games being priced at like $70, $80 because I think games have historically been one of the things that have resisted inflation for quite some time compared to other things. Games for the longest time were like $50, $60 and relatively unchanged in terms of like the premium games. And in relative terms, I think it's only kind of recently that they started charging for like $70 games. And I thought it was just like a matter of time until they start doing that. Regardless, I think TLDR, how you price a game has become much more subjective and topical than ever. And then I think my final note about the monetary side of this is I think that as time goes on, people are also more conscious of how they use their money to support companies and people. People are more conscious consumers these days, and people see supporting like a small dev or a small studio or indie games the same way that they support like a small business, and they see giving $30 to an indie game to be a little bit more different and have a little bit more value compared to giving that same $30 to like a big corporation. And finally, this leveling between indie, AA versus AAA. I don't think it's a coincidence that this is happening when the industry is economically struggling. When I think of AAA companies, I think of like pressure for financial success in the midst of having record layoffs, company crunch culture, and having bureaucracy and red tape and that top-down company structure really hindering the creative process. And with smaller studios and indie companies, obviously there's still that crunch culture and financial pressures. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of studios that have undergone their studios completely shutting down or their games being killed off completely. But I think these companies that do make it have the benefit of having smaller teams collaborating in what is usually a flat company structure, allowing for greater creative innovation and flexibility. We directly saw this with Silksong in producing just a very high quality product. So anyways, I think my main takeaways here is I don't think these indie games doing so well in 2025 are just individual successes. I think it's actually a signal for a greater shift in the industry. And we'll see more of this in the coming year as there's a bigger variety of games to play and players continue to be conscious of where their support goes. That's pretty much all I had to say on this topic. By the time this video comes out, I believe I will be on a 19-hour trip to Southeast Asia, which is so long. Unfortunately though, it is in the middle of these really cool releases happening in October. I plan to play like Ghost of Yotei, Little Nightmares 3, the new Pokemon game, all next month, but I think I'm literally going to be late to playing all of those games until I'm back. But I am excited for my first real vacation in quite a while. If you guys have any opinions or thoughts on this topic, I would love to read them in the comments below as usual. And let me know what I should play on the flight back, because I do have a list of games that I plan to play on the way there. I think I'm going to be continuing Silksong, probably starting up Hades too. I think we're gonna try to finish Split Fiction on the flight. We got a headphone splitter just to finish that game. And then I'm sure there's a bunch of games in my backlog on my Switch that I can kill some time with as well. But until then, I will see you guys in the next one. We're officially in spooky season, so I'm excited to talk about all things horror games in the next video. So until then, thank you for watching and I'll see you soon. Bye.